All right, so we're diving into this crazy legal situation. It's like something straight out of a movie.
Oh, yeah.
This judge steps down from this super high-profile trial
Mm.
and then gets ordered back. And it causes this big standoff with the defendant.
Wow.
We're talking about the case of Nnamdi Kanu,
Right.
the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra. You know, that group pushing for an independent state in southeastern Nigeria.
Yeah, I know them.
And he's facing some pretty heavy charges.
Yeah, like what?
Treasonable felony.
Oh, wow, that's serious.
It is. And what I find really interesting is
What's that?
this whole thing, it's not just about the legal stuff.
Yeah.
It really gets into like individual rights and how those bump up against the power of the state.
Yeah, definitely. It's like a real clash.
Exactly. So we've got all these articles here. Each one's like a little piece of the puzzle.
Uh-huh.
And today we're going to try to put it all together for you.
Sounds good.
Untangle all those legal arguments,
Right.
explore what could happen to Kanu and the Biafra movement,
Right.
and try to figure out what this all means for Nigeria.
Yeah.
That's a lot to unpack.
It is. But it's a wild story. So let's rewind back to September 2024.
Right.
Justice Nyako. She was the one originally in charge of Kanu's trial.
Right.
She decided to recuse herself.
Why did she do that?
Well, after the defense team raised concerns about potential bias.
Oh, I see. They were worried about her being impartial.
Exactly. It's like you want to make sure everyone feels like the trial is fair, right?
Allegedly.
Yeah.
That's super important for the whole process.
Totally. But then things took a left turn.
Oh, really? What happened?
Chief Judge Justice John Soho, he stepped in and ordered Justice Nyako to come back to the case.
Wait, so he overruled her recusal?
Pretty much. He basically said you need a formal application for recusal, not just a verbal request.
That's interesting. So where does that leave things?
Well, it brings up this whole question of power dynamics in the Nigerian legal system.
How so?
The chief judge, he has a lot of authority. And to overrule a recusal like this, it's not something you see every day.
Right, so this move puts Justice Nyako right back in charge. Yep. And it really puts a spotlight on that hierarchy within the judiciary.
It makes you think about who really has the final say.
For sure. So with Justice Nyako back on the case,
Yeah.
whether she wanted to be or not,
Mm-hmm.
what was Kanu's reaction?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too.
Well, let's just say he was not happy about it.
I bet.
He basically challenged Justice Nyako's right to be presiding over the trial.
So he's saying she shouldn't be the judge anymore.
Right. His argument was that by recusing herself, she basically gave up jurisdiction.
Jurisdiction meaning...
Like she no longer had the authority to handle the case.
Okay, so he's saying once you step down, you're out.
Exactly. It's a pretty bold move.
It is. So did he just want a different judge, or was there something more to it?
It seems like there was more to it. Kanu went a step further.
What did he do?
He requested that if no other judge in Abuja would take the case, it should be moved to the southeastern region of Nigeria.
Oh, wow, back to where he's from.
Exactly. Which is also where the alleged crimes happened.
I see. So it's about more than just the judge.
Right. This move really highlights a concern he has about the whole trial, the perception of fairness.
Yeah, can he really get a fair trial in a court that's so far away from his supporters?
And potentially ideologically different, too.
It raises some serious questions about neutrality.
So we've got this whole recusal, reinstatement, jurisdiction drama.
That's a lot.
And the legal world, they're not all on the same page about it.
Really? So they're divided on the chief judge's decision.
Yeah. Some legal experts, like Mohammed Abeni,
I know him.
they acknowledge that it's possible for a judge to return after recusing themselves.
Okay.
But they emphasize that it's definitely unusual and that it would require a very strong justification.
So not totally unheard of, but definitely raises some eyebrows.
Exactly. But then you have other lawyers, like Jide John Mary, who take a much stricter stance.
How so?
They argue that Justice Nyako coming back to the case is actually illegal.
Wow. They're drawing a hard line.
They are. They point to specific parts of the Nigerian constitution.
Oh, like...
that focus on enforcing court rulings,
I see.
suggesting that her initial recusal should have been the end of it.
So one side's saying it's unusual but maybe legal,
Right.
and the other side says it's totally against the rules.
You got it. But there's another legal expert, Nkuriom Idofia Akpan.
I don't know him.
He adds a whole other layer to this.
What's that?
He points out that the chief judge, he has the final say, accepting or rejecting a judge's recusal.
So even with all these arguments back and forth, the chief judge's order is what matters.
It all comes down to him.
Wow, that's a lot of power.
It is. So it seems like Kanu is kind of stuck with Justice Nyako, at least for now.
For now, yeah. This whole back and forth is wild. It's like this legal tug of war. And Kanu's right in the middle of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you know what else happened? This thing goes beyond just the procedures and the arguments.
Oh, what else is there?
There was that incident where Kanu actually shushed his own lawyer.
No way. Really?
Yeah. Aloy Ejimakor. Right in the middle of the courtroom.
Wow. You don't see that every day.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
It says a lot about Kanu and how he's approaching this whole thing.
Yeah, you got to wonder what was going through his head.
I know, right? But before we get into that, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture.
Okay. Good idea.
What are the potential consequences of all this?
Mm.
Not just for Kanu himself, but for the Biafra movement, and even for Nigeria as a whole.
Yeah, that's the real question. What's this all going to lead to?
Exactly.
It's like a ripple effect,
Yeah.
Spreading out from the courtroom. And those ripples, they're being felt way beyond Nigeria.
Really? How so?
This trial, it's drawing international attention
Mm.
and how it's handled. It reflects on Nigeria's commitment to the rule of law and human rights.
That's a really important point. The whole world is watching how Nigeria handles this.
They are. So let's shift gears for a sec.
Okay.
We've been focused on the legal back and forth,
Yeah,
but let's talk about the bigger picture. What are the implications for the Biafra movement itself?
good question. How does all this affect their push for independence?
Well, this indefinite adjournment, it's a double-edged sword for them.
How so?
On the one hand,
Uh,
it's creating a lot of frustration among IPOB supporters.
I can see that.
They might see this as just another delay tactic.
Like the Nigerian government's trying to silence them.
Exactly. Further evidence that they're trying to shut down their calls for self-determination.
So it could actually make them even more determined to fight for independence.
Yeah, that's the thing. It might actually strengthen their resolve.
Wow. So this delay could backfire.
It could. But on the other hand,
Yeah.
this delay also creates a period of uncertainty,
Like they're in limbo.
Exactly. It's like a holding pattern.
Right.
And it can be hard to maintain momentum,
Uh,
especially when you're fighting for a cause.
I bet. It's hard to keep people engaged when there's no clear end in sight.
That's the challenge.
So how do you think the Nigerian government's viewing this whole situation?
That's a good question.
Are they worried about potential unrest from IPOB supporters?
I mean, it's a delicate balancing act for them. They've labeled IPOB a terrorist organization.
Right.
And their track record, it shows they're willing to use force to stop protests and demonstrations.
So there's always a risk that this could escalate.
There is. It could lead to more clashes and instability in the region.
It's like they're walking a tightrope.
Exactly.
They need to keep things under control.
Mm-hmm.
But using heavy-handed tactics could backfire.
Totally.
Yeah.
It could push more people towards supporting IPOB.
And make the problem even worse.
The government needs to be thinking about the long-term consequences of their actions.
What do you mean?
Alienating the Igbo people who already feel marginalized.
Right.
It could deepen the divisions within the country.
And make finding a peaceful resolution even harder.
Much harder. This case isn't just about one man or one trial.
You're right. It's bigger than that.
It's about historical grievances, identity politics,
Yeah.
and the very fabric of Nigeria as a nation.
It makes you realize just how complex this whole situation is.
And speaking of identity politics,
Yeah.
let's circle back to that incident where Kanu shushed his own lawyer in the courtroom.
Oh, yeah. That was wild.
It sparked a lot of debate about cultural norms and how you're supposed to behave in court.
I remember reading some articles from legal experts who were outraged.
You're not happy.
They saw it as like this blatant sign of disrespect.
For the court and the legal process and that perspective, it makes sense within the traditional framework of legal proceedings.
Sure, but were there other reactions?
Yeah, there were other legal professionals who, while they didn't condone Kanu's actions, they offered a different interpretation.
Like what?
They suggested that his lawyer might have accepted being silenced because of Kanu's status, a leader, a symbol of the Biafra movement.
Oh, so it's almost like there are two sets of rules at play here.
It's fascinating, isn't
The
it?
formal rules of the courtroom
Uh-huh.
and these unspoken rules of cultural dynamics.
It's a really interesting interplay.
It makes you wonder, are certain norms of courtroom behavior being challenged here?
Good question. Is there a clash between Western legal traditions,
Yeah.
traditional Igbo concepts of authority and respect?
This is giving me a lot to think about.
It's a lot to unpack.
Cultural context matters so much in understanding a situation like this.
It really does.
It also makes me wonder about Kanu's legal strategy.
Yeah, what are they thinking?
His lawyer has a tough job
I bet.
navigating this complex case with a client who is let's just say, very assertive.
Right.
From a purely legal standpoint.
Yeah.
Some experts believe that Kanu's team would be better off focusing on procedural arguments and appeals.
Trying to find those technicalities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hoping to wear down the prosecution.
And maybe get the trial moved to a different location.
Right. But of course, we don't know what's happening behind closed doors.
We don't.
It's possible they have a completely different strategy in mind.
Who knows?
And with this indefinite adjournment, it's unclear when or even if this case will be back in court.
It's like we're on the edge of our seats waiting for the next move.
It is. But in the meantime, the impact of this case is still growing.
It is. It's a big deal.
And it makes me think about how this story is being shaped by the media.
Media? Yeah.
We have all these articles painting different pictures of what's happening.
Right. And everyone has their own take.
Exactly. So how much of what we're reading is objective reporting?
Versus biased storytelling.
That's the question.
It's like we're all trying to piece together a puzzle,
Uh-huh.
but we're only getting fragments of information.
And you have to wonder how those fragments are being chosen and presented to us.
Right. Who's deciding what we see?
And how does that shape our understanding of the whole story?
That's where media literacy becomes so crucial.
Media literacy means,
Being able to critically evaluate the information you're getting.
especially with a case as politically charged as this one.
It's easy to get caught up in the drama,
And the headlines.
but we need to step back and really assess the information we're consuming.
So how can we do that? How can we make sure we're getting a balanced view?
Well, ask yourself some questions.
Like,
Who is presenting this information?
okay.
And what might their motivations be?
Interesting.
Are they highlighting certain facts while downplaying others?
I see.
Are there voices and perspectives missing from the narrative?
Those are all really good points.
It's like becoming your own detective.
Oh, I like that.
Sifting through the evidence and trying to uncover the truth.
That's a good way to think about it.
And this trial, it's happening against a backdrop of this global surge in nationalism
Oh, yeah, you're right.
and movements pushing for self-determination.
Like what we're seeing with the Biafra movement.
Exactly. The Biafra movement, while it's rooted in Nigeria's history and context, it resonates with similar struggles for autonomy and recognition that are happening all over the world.
So it's important to connect those dots
It is.
and understand how global trends might influence what happens with this case.
Exactly. It's all connected.
It makes you wonder, could international pressure play a role in how the Nigerian government handles this?
That's a good question. Could there be outside forces with a vested interest in the outcome?
It's definitely possible. It highlights how interconnected our world is.
It does.
This isn't just a domestic issue.
It has international implications.
I've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
From the intricacies of Justice Nyako's recusal and the power dynamics in the Nigerian legal system
Right.
to the broader implications for the Biafra movement.
And the potential for unrest.
This trial, it's a tangled web,
It is.
and it's far from over.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Okay, hit me with it.
Given all the different legal opinions we've explored
Yeah.
and the incredibly high stakes involved,
Yeah.
how do you think this situation will impact the perception of the Nigerian judicial system, both within the country, on the international stage?
That's a great question. It's
Yeah.
something to really think about.
It is, will justice be served?
And what will that look like for Nnamdi Kanu, for the Biafra movement,
Mm-hmm.
and for Nigeria as a whole?
It's a story that will continue to captivate and challenge us all.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a fascinating conversation.
It has. Thanks for having me.
All right. That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode where we'll... Oh, wait a minute. We're not done yet. There's more to this story. So stick around. We'll be right back with part 2 of our deep dive into the Nnamdi Kanu trial.
Oh, yeah. This is just getting started. Yeah, it's like we're all trying to figure this thing out, but
Yeah.
we're only getting bits and pieces, right?
And who knows how those pieces are being chosen, or like how they're being presented to us.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. It's like we need to become media detectives or something.
That's a good way to put it.
Trying to sift through all the evidence, uncover the truth,
Absolutely. Especially with a case like this, so politically charged, it's easy to get swept up in the headlines and the drama.
and lose sight of what's really going on.
Exactly. So it's up to us to, critically evaluate what we're seeing and reading.
So how do we do that? How do we make sure we're getting a balanced view of things?
Well, you gotta ask yourself some questions. Like, who's presenting this information? And what's their angle Are they highlighting certain facts while downplaying others?
That's a good point. And are there voices missing from the story perspectives that aren't being heard?
Exactly. Those are all crucial things to consider.
It's like this trial is happening against this backdrop of, well, a global surge in nationalism.
Oh, yeah.
And all these movements pushing for self-determination.
It's a trend we're seeing all over the world.
And the Biafra movement. It's like a part of that larger story, isn't it?
It is. It's rooted in Nigeria's history and context, of course.
But it also resonates with these struggles for autonomy and recognition that are happening everywhere.
Right. So it's important to connect those dots. See how global trends might influence what happens in this case.
It makes you wonder if international pressure could play a role, in how the Nigerian government handles this.
It's a possibility. Could there be outside forces with a stake in the outcome?
It's something to think about for sure. This isn't just an internal Nigerian matter. It has implications beyond their borders.
Absolutely.
Like a global story.
So we've talked about a lot, from the whole Justice Nyako recusal situation and the power dynamics within the Nigerian legal system, to the bigger implications for the Biafra movement and the potential for unrest. It's complicated.
It is, this trial. It's like a tangled web.
And we're still waiting to see how it all unfolds.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, hit me with it.
Given all the different legal opinions we've explored and the incredibly high stakes involved.
Definitely high stakes.
How do you think this whole situation will impact how people see the Nigerian judicial system, both inside Nigeria and on the world stage?
That's a really good question. It's something we'll have to keep an eye on as this case progresses. Will justice be served?
And what will that look like for Nnamdi Kanu, for the Biafra movement, for Nigeria? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an incredible conversation.
It has. Thanks for having me. Yeah. And it's like, we're trying to solve this puzzle, but we only have a few pieces.
Right. It's like, how do those pieces get chosen? Who's deciding what we see? And how does that change how we understand the whole thing?
It's tough. That's why it's so important to be media literate, Especially with a case like this that's so politically charged, it's easy to get caught up in the headlines and the drama.
Right, and we lose sight of what's really going on.
Exactly.
Right.
So we have to, critically evaluate the information we're getting, think about where it's coming from.
So how can we do that? How can we make sure we're seeing the whole picture?
Well, think about who is giving you this information and what are their reasons for doing it. Are they emphasizing certain facts and ignoring others?
That's a good point.
And are there other voices and perspectives missing from the story?
Those are all really good things to think about.
It's like you have to become your own detective, sifting through the evidence and trying to find the truth.
I like that. It's like this trial is happening while there's this big global surge in nationalism going on.
Right, oh yeah.
And all these movements that are pushing for self-determination, like what we're seeing with the Biafra movement.
The Biafra movement is definitely a part of that bigger story. It's rooted in Nigeria's history and context, but it also connects with all these struggles for autonomy and recognition that are happening all over the world.
So we need to think about all of that. See how those global trends might affect this case.
Exactly. It's all connected.
Makes you wonder if international pressure could influence how the Nigerian government handles this.
It could. Could there be groups or countries that have a vested interest in the outcome?
It's possible.
Yeah.
This is bigger than just an internal Nigerian issue.
It has implications that reach beyond their borders. It's a global story.
We've covered a lot today, from Justice Nyako recusing herself.
Yeah.
And the power dynamics in the Nigerian legal system. To the implications for the Biafra movement and the possibility of unrest. It's complicated.
It is. This trial is like a tangled web.
And it's far from over.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one last thought.
All right, hit me with it.
Think about all the different legal opinions we've heard.
Yeah.
And the incredibly high stakes.
Definitely high stakes.
How do you think this will change how people view the Nigerian judicial system, both inside and outside the country?
That's a great question. It's something to really think about as we watch this case play out. Will justice be served?
And what will that even look like for Nnamdi Kanu, for the Biafra movement, for Nigeria as a whole? It's a story that will continue to fascinate and challenge us all.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an incredible conversation.
It really has. Thanks for having me.
It's been a wild ride trying to untangle this legal saga, and there are still so many unanswered questions.
Yeah.
The one thing's for sure, this case is far from over, and we'll be right here to break it all down for you as it unfolds. So hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the twists and turns. Until next time, stay curious, folks.